My name is Brittany, and I am 32 years old, an age considered the prime of life, but for me it has become a time of quiet, almost imperceptible withering in the shadow of my own home. I work as a programmer for a large tech company here in Austin, Texas. My days are measured not by the sun's shifts, but by the rhythm of written code, monotonous and predictable as a metronome. This work allowed me to buy a large, even spacious house in the western part of the city, where I live with my parents and my older sister, Jennifer, who is 35. And before we continue, write in the comments from which country and from which city you are watching this video. We are very interested to know from which corner of the planet our video is being watched. Enjoy watching. 3 years ago, the part of my life called marriage collapsed, crumbling like rotten fabric. The divorce left behind not a scar on my heart, but something more tangible, a large settlement, a sum sufficient to buy this house without a single sigh about a mortgage. Back then, in a fit of naive, almost childish hope, it seemed to me that it would be wonderful to gather everyone together under one roof, to provide my family with a comfortable haven, to create that very support, which I thought we all lacked. And so, I bought the house, bright and serene in appearance, and invited them to move in, imagining myself the architect of our collective happiness. Several years ago, my father took early retirement. He is only 61, still full of that restrained strength characteristic of men of his generation, but he declared he had worked enough and retreated into private life as if into a fortress. My mother never worked, at least as far as my memory reaches. Her world was always confined to the walls of the house, and her energy found an outlet in caring for the family, which now, in these empty rooms, seemed to have dried up. Jennifer, my sister, about 4 years ago with an enthusiasm I then mistook for genuine passion, started a natural soap business. She nurtured plans to sell artisanal soap online and at farmers markets, her speech full of words like natural extracts, unique recipes, and aromatherapy. But this enterprise never gained any real, tangible success. The business was barely afloat from the start, like a fragile soap bubble about to pop, and she constantly, with a persistence worthy of a better cause, tried to revive it with new marketing strategies that never worked, vanishing into sand like water. And so, I support the family financially. I have become the invisible pillar upon which this small world rests. I pay the mortgage, although I once thought I had escaped it, all the utilities, from the electricity that lights our shared evenings to the water that washes away the traces of our shared existence. I buy the groceries, filling the refrigerator with food that seems tasteless to me. I pay for my mother's shopping when she goes to the store, and I hear her unhurried stories about discounts and sales. I give Jennifer money to maintain her business, pay for endless supplies, festive-looking packaging that hides emptiness, advertising campaigns that never seem to yield visible results, merely draining resources into a digital abyss. Just last month, I transferred her $2,000 for another new marketing stunt that dissolved into the information noise without a trace. One afternoon last week, I was finishing writing code at work. The office was quiet, only the steady hum of computers breaking the silence. Outside the window, Austin hung in a hazy heat, and I was already anticipating the moment I could sink into the cool darkness of the road home. Then the phone rang. The screen flashed with a name, Mom. "Hi, sweetie," her voice sounded, painfully familiar. "I was thinking about dinner. Should I make chicken or pasta?" "Whatever you want, Mom. I'm not picky," I replied, feeling the familiar fatigue welling up. We talked about nothing important for a few minutes. She recounted something funny she saw on TV, something that happened at the grocery store. Then she said she had to go, and we said goodbye. But she didn't hang up. Instead of disconnecting, I heard a rustle, as if she had put the receiver down, but the call was still connected, and a quiet, steady hum pulsed in my ear. And then I heard my father's voice. It sounded cold even, almost robotic, devoid of the emotional shades I had ever heard in it. Living with Brittany is terrible, but we're only staying here because of the money. Then came my mother's voice, but it wasn't the soft, caring tone from a minute ago. It was filled with irritation and bitterness. "She's so greedy and selfish. I'm tired of asking her for money. I'm tired of explaining what I want to spend it on." And then Jennifer laughed. It was a cruel sound, sharp and triumphant, piercing me like a blade. "Brittany is only valuable for her money," her voice sounded clear and distinct. "Without it, she's a complete zero." I sat at my desk, pressing the phone to my ear, frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. The air around me seemed to have thickened and turned to glass. They spoke for a few more minutes, their voices weaving a unison of complaints and dissatisfaction, complaining about me, about the house I had given them, and about how they wished I would just give them money without questions, like a soulless ATM. Then the call finally ended, and silence settled in the receiver, louder than all their words. I sat there for a long time, not moving. My computer screen had darkened, reflecting my pale face, distorted by unspoken pain, and in that silence, my mind retreated into the past. I thought about my childhood, about those invisible cracks that always divided us, how my parents always put Jennifer first. I remembered how she wanted to take dance lessons, and they, gritting their teeth, paid for them, even though money was tight in the family. I saw myself from the outside, a quiet child who didn't ask for much, and then, the day I was accepted into university. I remember my vague expectation of pride, of celebration, but they barely noticed. They were too busy, too absorbed in helping Jennifer with her new, failed blogging career, which had started even before the soap business, another phantom venture consuming their time and resources, and the college years. Back then, I worked nights, freelanced as a programmer, built websites for small businesses, did everything I could to pay for my education, to not be a burden. And Jennifer didn't work. She just spent my parents' money on whatever she wanted, and in their eyes, I read not reproach for her, but approval, as if that's how it should be. And now, sitting in my office, in the silence that followed that call, I saw a clear, merciless line stretching from that past into the present, and I understood that nothing, essentially, had changed. Only the scale was larger and the price was higher. That day, I left work early, obeying a dull animal instinct to find shelter. I drove home on autopilot, my hands turning the wheel, my eyes watching the road, but my mind was somewhere far away, locked in the sound trap of that phone call. Austin flowed past the window, a bright, noisy world to which I no longer belonged. When I entered the house, everyone was in the living room, bathed in soft evening light. The scene was painfully familiar, idyllic, the one I had once painted in my own imagination. My father sat motionless in his armchair, staring at the flickering TV screen. Mom was flipping through the pages of a glossy magazine, her fingers sliding over the shiny paper with a detached air. Jennifer, lounging on the sofa, was chattering animatedly on the phone about something, and her laughter now sounded to me like a honed blade. "You're home early," my mother remarked, looking up at me. Her voice was even, caring, the one I had heard all my life, and my heart constricted from its familiarity. "I have a migraine. I'm going to lie down." "Don't you want dinner?" she asked, and I tried in vain to see a shadow of yesterday's irritation in her eyes. "No, I'm not hungry." I went to my room, the click of the lock behind me sounding like a gunshot, heralding the start of a new, invisible siege. I fell onto the bed, unable to stop trembling, and stared at the impeccably white ceiling while the words I had heard played over and over in my head like a broken record, cold, merciless, turning my entire past life into dust. The next morning, I woke up feeling turned inside out, but an inner core forged from resentment and pain forced me to put on a mask of normality. I acted as usual. I made breakfast for everyone as always: scrambled eggs, golden toast, strong coffee. The aroma, which once seemed a symbol of family comfort, was now bitter and deceptive. I watched them as they ate, trying to detect a grain of awareness, a shadow of guilt in their faces. My father sat in his usual place, buried in the newspaper, creating the illusion of immersion in world events. My mother, sipping coffee, talked about needing a new winter coat. She didn't ask directly, but every gesture, every intonation rise was more eloquent than any request. She wanted me to buy it for her. Jennifer, hunched over her phone, was scrolling through her Instagram feed, her fingers moving quickly across the screen, and she hardly noticed anyone, living in her own separate, consuming world. They all acted perfectly normally, as if they hadn't ground my dignity into dust yesterday, hadn't passed judgment on me behind my back. Over the next 2 weeks, I began to notice things I had overlooked before. Those small, barely perceptible details that suddenly seemed like important clues in the investigation of my own life. My father, for example, started constantly questioning me about my finances, how much I earn, where I keep my savings, what my investment strategy is. I used to think he was just showing fatherly concern for my career, but now I wondered if he was coldly and calculatingly figuring out how much money was available, how much could be extracted without fuss. My mother came home from shopping trips with heavy Neiman Marcus bags, from which silk scarves and boxes of expensive shoes peeked out. She always said they were on sale, with a light laugh meant to convince me of her thrift, but I began to doubt it. Her new frugality smelled not of clearance sales, but of my hard-earned money. Jennifer hadn't been working at all for several months. She claimed her business was on hold while she planned a grand relaunch, yet she continued to methodically, as if on schedule, ask me for money. $500 here for Instagram ads, $1,000 there for new, revolutionary packaging. This stream of requests seemed endless, and I finally saw in it not a naive belief in success, but a cynical exploitation. I met my friend Madison for coffee at Starbucks. Madison is a lawyer, a person of sharp mind and unwavering will. We've been friends since college, and now she was the only one I could trust with this soul-poisoning secret. I laid it all out for her. That fateful phone call, the overheard conversation, the subsequent observations of my family's behavior. After listening, Madison looked at me with that professional firmness that brooks no doubt. "You need to protect yourself, Brittany," she said, and her words sounded like a verdict. "Start gathering evidence. Record everything. Create a chronicle of their betrayal, and check your finances thoroughly, down to the last comma." I followed her advice. I started making notes in my phone, meticulously recording every suspicious moment, every strange, out-of-place comment, every request for money, every new expensive trinket in my mother's hands. And then I tackled the bank statements, logging into online banking with a feeling like lifting the lid on my own grave. That's when I found them. First, there were strange charges on my credit card that I initially dismissed as bank errors. A $600 dinner at a luxurious restaurant I'd never been to. Purchases at Neiman Marcus for $2,500 that I didn't make. Subscriptions to streaming services I didn't use. Then, with a lump in my throat and a soul-chilling premonition, I logged into my savings account. My hands were shaking, my fingers sliding over the keyboard as I scanned the long columns of transactions. And I saw them. Dozens of transfers, several $1,000s each, flowing away like streams merging into one black river to an account unknown to me. They were all coldly labeled as consulting services or miscellaneous expenses. I checked the recipient's details, and my world completely collapsed. It was a business account registered in Jennifer's name. My parents, using their access to my joint account, which I had provided for paying bills and buying groceries, had all this time been secretly, quietly, like thieves, transferring my money to my sister's failing enterprise. Tens of thousands of dollars over the past year. A fortune washed away into sand, stolen from me by those I trusted most. I needed more evidence, irrefutable and clear as a blade. I couldn't confront them based solely on one overheard phone call and dry, soulless bank statements that could be interpreted as a mistake or a misunderstanding. I needed to know exactly what they thought of me. What words were born in their heads and fell from their lips when my shadow didn't fall on the doorstep, when they were sure I couldn't hear. I needed their naked, ugly truth. I went online into the dark abyss of an online store and ordered a small, almost toy-like voice-activated microphone. the kind usually used by students to record lectures or secretaries for meetings. It was bland, inconspicuous, the perfect tool for the quiet war I was now waging within the walls of my own home. The package arrived 2 days later, wrapped in bubble wrap as if it were something fragile and valuable, though inside was only bitter necessity. I installed it in the living room, the heart of our false family hearth, hiding it behind the massive gilded frame of a painting on the bookshelf, among volumes no one ever opened. It blended into the interior, became part of the landscape of their comfortable existence, bought with my money. For the next few days, I listened to the recordings every evening in my room, in complete darkness, pressing the headphones to my ears as if afraid the sound might leak out. The first day was mostly mundane, filled with the noise of daily life. My father watching sports, his lone remarks thrown into the void, my mother talking on the phone with a friend, discussing some recipe infinitely remote from me. It was a parody of a normal life, and I was beginning to doubt my plan. But on the second day, I heard something that made my blood run cold. My father, his voice found in the silence, was addressing my mother. I'm tired of her. If she just disappeared, the money would go to us and Jennifer. We could really enjoy it then. A pause followed, and then my mother replied, "Don't say that." But there was no horror or indignation in her voice. She seemed to be just mechanically, out of habit, trying to express formal disagreement, like swatting away a bothersome fly. On the third day, Jennifer was talking on the phone with a friend, stretched out on the living room sofa. She was speaking loudly, casually, not caring if anyone heard, confident in her impunity. "Brittany is so ugly and stupid," came through the headphones. "No wonder her husband left her. She's a complete failure in her personal life. But at least she has money we can use." Her friend on the other end laughed, and that laughter sounded like approval. Jennifer continued, spewing all her venom about me. She called me controlling, boring, a worthless creature whose value was exhausted by the numbers in a bank account. I sat in my room, in pitch darkness, listening to the recording, clenching my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms, leaving red half-moons. This was my family, the people I supported, whom I helped unconditionally, to whom I gave everything I had. On Sunday morning, as serene light poured through the window, I decided it was time to ask a few questions, to step out of the shadow and look them in the eye. I found my mom in the kitchen. She was standing by the stove, her hands performing the familiar rituals, making coffee. The aroma, once cozy, now seemed suffocating to me. "Mom, I need to ask you something," I began, and my voice sounded surprisingly steady. "I noticed some money transfers from my account, large sums being transferred to an account under Jennifer's name. Do you know anything about that?" She froze. Her hand, reaching for a cup, stopped mid-motion, and a tense silence hung in the air. Then she slowly turned, and a quick, practiced, almost plastic smile spread across her face. "Oh, honey. Those were just gifts for Jennifer, meant to help her get her business back on track. You know how hard she's been working." "Gifts?" I repeated, and the ice in my voice made her smile waver. "We're talking about tens of thousands of dollars transferred without my knowledge, without asking me." "Well, in a family, things should be shared, shouldn't they?" She took a step toward me, and her eyes held an alarming mix of justification and irritation. "I didn't think you'd mind." "You didn't think I'd mind you taking my money without my permission?" My question was sharp as a razor. She laughed nervously, a short, dry sound like a cough. "Brittany, honey, you're making this worse than it is. We're family. What's yours is ours, isn't it?" I said nothing more. There were no words capable of expressing the chasm that had opened between us at that moment. I simply turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her alone with the steaming coffee and the collapsed mask of well-being. The next day, Monday, during my lunch break, I went to my bank. The glass doors closed behind me, cutting off the outside world. In the sterile quiet of the manager's office, I opened a new savings account, accessible only to me. No co-signers, no additional card holders, nothing. It was a fortress erected around what remained of my life. Then, with cold determination, I transferred all the money, all my financial lifeblood, from the old defiled family account to this new impregnable one. The amount was a six-figure sum, a substantial result of my labor, and a bitter monument to how much they had managed to steal. I changed the passwords on all my other accounts, checking, investment portfolios, everything their greedy hands could reach. I called customer service and, in a voice that brooked no argument, had my parents removed as authorized users from all accounts they had ever had access to. It was an act of total financial separation, silent and merciless. When I returned home that evening, the house smelled of stew. My mother was bustling in the kitchen as if nothing had happened. Everyone, as usual, gathered around the large dining table, their faces lit by the soft light of the chandelier. They were waiting for me to start dinner. I sat in my usual spot, pushing away the plate of stew that now smelled not of food, but of lies and betrayal. I waited silently, watching them eat, their jaws moving in a measured, sated rhythm. I waited until everyone had food on their plates, until that brief moment of sated contentment reached its climax. And then, shattering that waxen idol, I spoke. My voice was quiet, but in the silence of the dining room, it was louder than any shout. I heard your conversation last week when Mom forgot to hang up. I heard what you really think of me. An absolute tomb-like silence fell upon the room, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the mantelpiece. My father's fork, laden with a piece of meat, froze halfway to his mouth as if rooted. My mother's practiced, habitual smile stiffened into an absurd grimace. Jennifer's phone, that constant companion of her idleness, slipped from her weakened fingers and landed softly on her lap. For a long, drawn-out moment that seemed an eternity, no one made a sound. They just stared at me, caught off guard like thieves caught red-handed in broad daylight. "Brittany, sweetheart," my mother finally stammered, her voice trembling, betraying the falseness. It was just talk. We didn't mean it, honestly. We were just letting off steam, just venting some pent-up emotions. I didn't dignify that excuse with a response. Instead, I slowly, with deliberate calm, took out my phone. My fingers slid across the cold glass of the screen. "Let me play you something," I said, and there was no malice or triumph in my words, only an icy, impartial statement of fact, for clarity. I pressed play, and their own voices, distorted by the cheap microphone yet unmistakably truthful, filled the room, sounding like a verdict. The recording poured from the speaker, my father's cold, robotic voice wishing for my disappearance, my mother's irritated grumbling, tired of my stinginess, Jennifer's venomous, hate-filled monologue calling me ugly, stupid, worthless. I watched their faces as they listened to the sounding confession of their own vileness. My mother turned pale as a sheet, beads of sweat appearing on her forehead. My father clenched his jaw so hard white spots appeared on his cheeks. Jennifer, unable to bear the weight of her own words, just stared at her plate as if hoping to sink through the floor. "And that's not all," I said when silence fell upon the room again, even more ringing than before. I placed the phone on the table like evidence. "I also know about the money you transferred to Jennifer, tens of thousands of dollars from my account, without my knowledge, without my permission." We thought you'd want to help the family," my father croaked, his voice, always so confident, now sounding cracked and weak. "We thought it was essentially shared money," my mother chimed in, grasping at a straw. "In a family, things should be shared." I picked up the phone again. My silence was more eloquent than any words. I played another recording. That very conversation of Jennifer with her friend, where she, laughing hysterically, called me a stingy controller who hoards money like a dragon on its gold. The cruel words, reinforced by cynical giggles, hung in the air, finishing off the last remnants of their lies. "I want you all out of my house," I said, and not a muscle twitched in my voice. "By tomorrow evening." Immediately, as if on cue, the expected storm broke out. Mom burst into tears, her body shaking with sobs, loud and theatrical. Jennifer jumped up from her chair with such a clatter it almost overturned. "Are you serious?" she screamed, her face contorted with rage. "You're throwing your own family out on the street?" "I am completely serious," I replied, and my calmness seemed to infuriate her even more. My father leaned forward, elbows on the table, his fingers clenched into a helpless fist. "Brittany, let's be reasonable," he began, and his tone held the familiar notes of lecturing. "We all got a little heated. We can talk about this like adults. We can work this out. We could go to a therapist," my mother whispered through her sobs, dabbing her tears with a napkin. "Family therapy. We can fix this. We can repair everything. You can pay for it." "No," my voice cut through their babble. "I want you to leave. Tomorrow." While Jennifer was still shouting, my mother weeping and my father trying to negotiate, I slowly rose from the table. I didn't look at them anymore. I walked out of the dining room, went upstairs, entered my room, and turned the key in the lock. The click sounded like a final period. I didn't come out until morning, listening to the muffled sounds of arguments and packing behind the door. The next morning, when I woke up, the house was filled with an unusual, deafening silence. No sound of my mother's voice, no blare of my father's sports channel, no shrill laughter from Jennifer. I went downstairs and my footsteps echoed hollowly in the emptiness. All their belongings were gone. They had packed and left at dawn, leaving no trace except the heavy smell of their presence. I walked through the empty rooms like a ghost in my own house. The guest bedroom, where my parents had lived, was empty, the bed covered with a bare mattress. Jennifer's room was cleared to sterility, only a forgotten hair tie lying on the floor. The living room looked alien and uncomfortable without my father's scattered newspapers and my mother's glossy magazines. My phone vibrated, shattering the silence. Notifications flashed on the screen, dozens of messages from them. They were all full of apologies, requests to talk, offers to fix everything, to return things to how they were. I swiped across the screen, ruthlessly deleting one message after another without bothering to read them. There were no words that could patch up the chasm they had dug with their own hands. Then I called Madison. "It's over," I said, and my voice sounded tired for the first time. "They're gone." "Good," she replied without a hint of surprise, her legal mind already working ahead. "Come to my office this afternoon. We need to make sure they can't access any of your accounts or assets. Lock everything down legally." Madison helped me draw up a whole package of legal documents, strict and unambiguous, designed to permanently block any unauthorized access to my finances. She made sure everything was 100% protected, so they couldn't try to contest anything, lay claim to my money or property through the courts by manipulating the concept of family. Meanwhile, as I expected, Jennifer couldn't resist having the last word on social media. I saw it when a mutual friend, embarrassed and perplexed, sent me a screenshot. She had written a long, rambling, hysterical post on her Instagram, full of pathos and feigned offense, portraying me as a greedy, selfish monster, a heartless creature who had mercilessly thrown her own family out on the street, leaving them destitute and homeless. She masterfully played on the strings of public sympathy, presenting herself as an innocent victim, and me as a caricature villain from a melodrama. I could have responded. Righteous indignation boiled within me, and I felt my fingers itching to type out the whole truth, to post all the evidence, those horrifying audio recordings, scans of bank statements with the stolen thousands. I could have brought the full weight of the proof down upon them and publicly torn off their masks. But I didn't. Not out of magnanimity, but out of the deepest, coldest contempt. I simply left it as it was, letting her words hang in the digital void, unworthy of refutation. Let the world think what it wants. My war was over, and I wasn't going to fight it on someone else's field. The first few weeks after their departure were strange, almost surreal. The house, once feeling cramped from their presence, now deafened me with its emptiness and silence. It seemed too big, too airless. I woke up in the morning and made coffee only for myself, and the sound of the boiling kettle echoed hollowly in the quiet. I came home from work, opened the door, and heard nothing but my own footsteps. But the initially frightening silence gradually began to reveal its other side. It wasn't unpleasant. The constant buzzing tension was replaced by a deep, healing calm. No one met me with requests for money. No one made sarcastic comments that dug under my skin. No one looked at me as a walking ATM whose opinions and feelings meant nothing. I could immerse myself in my software projects without interruptions, undistracted by their endless dramas and demands. Instead of cooking bland pasta or chicken to suit everyone else's tastes, I experimented in the kitchen, making the food I actually wanted to eat. I watched documentaries and old classic series on TV that I liked without hearing my father's grumbling about the news. I went to bed and woke up when I wanted, obeying only the rhythm of my own body. For the first time in 3 long years, I truly felt that the house was my personal space, my fortress, not a free hotel with round-the-clock service. My phone, however, kept blowing up with messages, becoming the last channel through which they tried to reach me. My mother sent long, wordy texts writing about her remorse, the terrible mistakes they had made, that families should forgive each other, that blood is thicker than water. My father limited himself to short, dry SMS, insisting that we needed to talk like adult, sensible people. Jennifer vacillated between apologies full of false humility and flashes of anger, accusing me of overreacting, of making a mountain out of a molehill. I didn't respond to any of these messages. I just let them accumulate, watching the number of unread messages grow, and eventually I simply ignored them, stopping even opening these dialogues. It was my digital shield. Madison came over for dinner about a month after they left. We were sitting on the terrace, and she, sipping wine, looked at me intently. "How are you?" she asked, and there wasn't a trace of condescending pity in her voice, only businesslike concern. "Better than I expected," I admitted honestly. "I thought I'd feel guilty, empty. But no, nothing like that." "Good," Madison nodded. "You shouldn't feel guilty. They used you, Brittany, cynically and without a shred of conscience." "I know," I sighed. "It's just a pity I didn't see it sooner. So many years." "You see it now," she interrupted softly but firmly. "That's what matters." And we started talking about other things, work, mutual friends, a vacation she was planning to Italy. It was incredibly pleasant to have a normal, light conversation, not touching the shredded topic of family drama. After she left, I walked around the empty house for a long time, and my thoughts acquired a strange, crystalline clarity. It was a beautiful, even luxurious house, but now every room, every corner, was inextricably linked with bad, soul-poisoning memories. The living room reminded me of my father grumbling at the TV about politics. The kitchen, of my mother, with her sweet voice and transparent, yet constant hints about things she wanted. The hallway, of Jennifer, with her perpetual requests for money for her hopeless business. I didn't want to live here anymore. This place was saturated with poison, and no calm could air it out. The next week, I dialed the number of the best realtor in the city. We listed the house for sale the following Monday, and as expected, it went instantly. By Friday, I had 3 solid offers, significantly above the asking price. I accepted the highest one, and we proceeded with the legal paperwork, which went surprisingly smoothly and quickly. While the paperwork was underway, I started looking for a new place for myself, something completely different. I wanted something smaller, cozier, on the other side of the city, away from these streets that held the memory of my delusion. I dreamed of a place with more greenery, tall trees, and fewer people, something that would become a symbol of a real, clean start. After a short search, I found what I was looking for, a neat house in a quiet, leafy neighborhood near Zilker Park. It was half the size of my previous property, just 3 modest bedrooms instead of 5 spacious ones. But it had its own unique charm, a small sun-drenched yard with sprawling oaks and a cozy brick terrace in the back. Looking at it, I felt, for the first time in a long while, not a cold calculation, but a warm, poignant feeling. It felt right. I made an offer immediately, and it was accepted without delay. The timing aligned perfectly, almost fatefully. The closing for the sale of the old house and the purchase of the new one were scheduled for the same week, as if life itself was drawing a line, offering me no pause between the past and the future. During this time, as if through thick glass, I learned bits of news from mutual acquaintances, people who knew both me and my family and had heard both sides of the story, now distorted and polarized. The news came in fragments, like pieces of someone else's life in which I no longer participated. My parents, it turned out, were struggling, far more than they could have imagined. They had moved into a small, cramped rental apartment in a remote suburb, and it was a painful fall from the heights of comfort I had provided. My father, whose early retirement had seemed a deserved reward, had taken a part-time job at Walmart. He worked in the stockroom, doing exhausting, monotonous labor, unloading trucks and stocking shelves, and his once confident posture, I was told, had hunched under the weight of boxes and humiliation. My mother, deprived of my generous transfers, was forced to sell her expensive clothes and accessories on eBay. All those designer bags and silk scarves bought with my money and tales of discounts were now being auctioned off to pay for electricity and rent. Their comfortable, serene lifestyle, built on the foundation of my labor, had collapsed overnight like a house of cards, left without my financial support. They were learning firsthand in a bitter and merciless way what it truly means to work for your money and live within your means. Jennifer's situation, according to rumors, was even worse and, frankly, more predictable. That angry post about me on Instagram, meant to evoke a wave of sympathy, had backfired, turning against her. Users in the comments, more perceptive than she assumed, began questioning her version of the story, picking up inconsistencies and demanding proof. Friends and followers, initially supportive, gradually turned away, calling her narrative arrogant and haughty. And then, like the final nail in the coffin, her last advertiser dropped her. A small soap company that had sponsored her posts decided it didn't want its brand associated with a toxic family drama and public scandal. Without that, albeit modest, sponsorship, the small income that had still somewhat sustained her business completely dried up. Her social media, once a platform for her self-admiration, fell silent. She stopped posting about her series, stopped sharing sanitized lifestyle content, stopped everything that created the illusion of her success. In the end, her business, that soap bubble, finally and irrevocably died, leaving behind nothing but debts and a bitter aftertaste. I heard this whole story from Sarah, a woman who had once been friends with both me and Jennifer, and now, apparently, felt it her duty to be a messenger. One evening, she called me, and her voice held an awkward mix of concern and curiosity. "I thought you should know what's happening," she said. "Jennifer. She's in a very bad state. She's working as a barista at one of the chain coffee shops now. She hates it fiercely, and she's constantly telling everyone how unfairly life has treated her." "She made her choice," I replied coldly, and there was no gloating or regret in my words. "I know, Sarah. I just wanted to tell you. Also, your parents are really struggling. Your father, he looks exhausted all the time, aged 20 years. "They are adults," I countered. "They can figure it out. Or not. It's no longer my concern." Sarah was silent for a moment, and in the silence I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. "You've really cut ties with them, haven't you?" she finally blurted out. "Completely. Finally." "Completely," I confirmed, and in that word lay all my new, hard-won freedom. 4 months after I kicked them out, I moved into the new house. It was a Saturday morning in early autumn, when the air was already genuinely cool, transparent, and filled with the smell of falling leaves. The weather was beautiful, as if nature itself was blessing my new beginning. The movers carefully brought in my furniture, which I had carefully sorted through, getting rid of many things forever linked to the past, keeping only what I truly needed and valued. However, the new house, unlike the previous one, didn't feel empty or lifeless. It felt the right size for me, cozy, manageable, and truly mine, in every molecule. I spent the weekend happily unpacking boxes and putting everything in order, putting a piece of myself into every corner. I set up my home office in the small guest bedroom, hung paintings on the walls that I had chosen solely according to my own taste, arranged new, fresh plants in the living room. On Sunday evening, finished with unpacking, I went out onto the back porch with a glass of red wine. I sat in a comfortable rocking chair and looked at the tall oaks in my yard, their foliage beginning to turn gold and crimson. The sun was setting, bathing everything in a soft scarlet light, and I listened to the evening songs of birds preparing for sleep. This was my life now, only mine. My house, my rules, my decisions. No one asked for money. No one talked about me behind my back. No one treated me as if I existed only to finance their endless needs and whims. 6 months after moving into the new house, the routine I had chosen for myself finally took root and blossomed within me, bringing deep, quiet satisfaction. I now woke up when my own, well-rested body wanted to, not because someone was clattering pots in the kitchen or turning the TV on full blast. I immersed myself in software projects that truly engaged my mind and ignited professional excitement that seemed interesting to me, not just a source of money to meet others' demands. The evenings became entirely mine, and I spent them as I wanted, reading, watching movies, or simply enjoying the silence. Work, unsurprisingly, improved noticeably. My boss, a perceptive and unsentimental man, once remarked that I had become much more focused, collected, and less prone to external distractions. He was absolutely right. My brain no longer had to constantly, in the background, track potential threats. I wasn't checking my phone every 5 minutes expecting humiliating messages from relatives asking for money. My subconscious wasn't frantically calculating what new, unforeseen expenses they would burden me with this time. That mental energy, that colossal cognitive load, was now directed into productive channels. The result wasn't long in coming. I was promoted to senior programmer and put in charge of a new, large-scale and ambitious project. It was complex, multi-layered work, the kind that made me look forward to my desk in the mornings. I was building a new data management system practically from scratch, and I was doing it in close collaboration with a team of talented developers whom I genuinely liked and admired. The money from the sale of the old house, the one that had become a symbol of my slavery, was prudently and thoughtfully invested in reliable investments. I no longer spent it on the endless needs of my family, no longer threw it into the sand of their ambitions and whims. Now I was saving it for myself, for my own independent future. Maybe I'd buy a better car, the one I'd always dreamed of. Maybe I'd finally go on a real, full-fledged vacation to a place I'd always wanted to visit without having to account for the spending to anyone. Or maybe that money would just sit in the account, giving me that priceless feeling of security and safety that no wealth can buy. My new neighborhood turned out to be the perfect embodiment of tranquility. Quiet, cozy streets with sprawling old trees, whose canopies provided pleasant shade. Neighbors who waved hello when meeting at the mailboxes, but didn't intrude on my life or pry with questions. 2 blocks from the house was a charming coffee shop where I went to read on weekend mornings, enjoying the aroma of fresh coffee and the atmosphere of a leisurely morning. There, in this new world for me, I unexpectedly found a friend. A woman named Claire who lived 3 houses down. She was an elementary school teacher, about my age, and, like me, had been through a divorce, which gave us a common, silently understood starting point. Sometimes we had dinner together, went to the movies, or just sat on one of our terraces, chatting about anything. It was incredibly pleasant and easy to have a friend nearby who knew nothing about my loud family drama, who didn't look at me with pity or curiosity. She knew me simply as Brittany, her programmer neighbor who loved hiking and ironically watched bad reality shows. From time to time, news about my family still reached me, though I didn't ask for or seek it. Austin, after all, isn't that big a city, and mutual acquaintances, like involuntary couriers, still passed on tidbits. My parents were still crammed into their small rental apartment. My father was still working at the Walmart stockroom. I heard he had tried to get back his old, long-abandoned job from which he had once retired so easily. but his position had been filled years ago, and at 61, with a huge gap in his resume, he couldn't find anything better than this exhausting retail work. By then, my mother had sold most of her former arsenal, designer bags, jewelry, expensive clothes, and in what seemed a particularly bitter irony, she had taken a part-time job in a small boutique, a job she had once spoken of with arrogance, saying it was beneath her. Jennifer, I learned, was still working as a barista. Her once bright and loud Instagram account maintained a tomb-like silence. Her soap business, that illusion into which so much of my money and her empty dreams had been poured, had completely ceased to exist. Once, driven more by scientific than personal interest, I looked into its remains. The website was gone, replaced by a standard hosting page. The social media accounts were abandoned, the last posts dated from that scandalous time. Sarah, my involuntary informant, told me that Jennifer had tried to ask some of our mutual friends for financial help, claiming she was in desperate straits. But most people, taught by bitter experience or simply possessing common sense, politely but firmly told her no. They had seen that angry post, heard the other side of the story, and now understood perfectly well what she had done. Hearing this news, I felt absolutely nothing. No poignant satisfaction, no gnawing guilt, not even a ghost of sadness. Only a kind of neutral, detached acknowledgement of fact. They were living their lives, and I was living mine. Their paths and consequences were their own choice. And the brightest confirmation of this separation was the silence of my phone, which had lasted for several months. No messages, no calls, no attempts to contact me from any of them. They had finally stopped their attempts to reach me, and in that silence, I found my final, unconditional liberation. One Saturday afternoon, as soft sunlight flooded the impeccably clean floors of the local supermarket, I, wandering the aisles with a cart containing groceries chosen only for myself, saw my mom. She was frozen in the produce section, intently and with a new, unfamiliar tension examining tomatoes, as if her choice depended on something much more significant than just a dinner salad. She looked immeasurably older than I remembered, her shoulders hunched under an invisible weight, her face bearing the stamp of a deep, months-accumulated weariness that had erased her former well-fed serenity. She saw me the same moment I noticed her, and our gazes met over the bright, indifferent greenery of the lettuces, hanging in a tense, silent dialogue full of the unspoken and the irreparable. For a second, brief as a flash, I thought she would take a step, try to speak, say something, a plea, an excuse, a reproach. But instead, she just slowly, with an almost mechanical detachment, turned away, and without raising her eyes, moved to the next aisle, dissolving among the shelves of canned goods, as if we really were strangers who had accidentally bumped into each other in a crowd. I finished my shopping in silence, checked out, and went out to the parking lot. And only there, loading the bags into the trunk, did I notice that my hands were trembling slightly. But it was the last weak echo of the past, which immediately fell silent, leaving behind neither anger nor sadness. There was no loud scene, no painful confrontation, only a quiet, final acknowledgement that we had become two strangers connected by nothing but a chance meeting at the vegetable counter. Returning home to my quiet, peace-filled house, I leisurely made dinner and settled down with a plate on my porch, under the canopy of the spreading oaks that were now full of young, lush greenery, the air thick and sweet with the scent of flowering bushes. It was late spring, and the whole world around seemed renewed, green and tremulously alive, and this generous fullness of being made me contemplate the contrast between that former life and the present one. I remembered how I constantly, exhaustingly, worked to feed and support 4 adults, how I paid for absolutely everything, from the mortgage to their whims, while they, well-fed and pampered, only complained and demanded more. I heard again in my memory the echo of their voices mercilessly calling me greedy and selfish, and felt the icy horror of realizing that they had methodically, like thieves, stolen tens of thousands of dollars from me. buying their illusion of comfort with it. Then my thoughts smoothly flowed to my present life, the one I had built with my own hands, defended in a struggle with those who should have been my support, to working on projects that ignited my mind and stirred passion, to the ability to save money for myself, dreaming of a future that belonged only to me, to the simple, deep happiness of living in a house I loved, where no one ever demanded, blackmailed, or humiliated me, to the joy of having friends nearby who valued me for my character, my laugh, our shared interests, not for the thickness of my wallet. The difference was colossal, like between a suffocating, cramped cage and boundless free sky. Yes, I had lost the family given to me at birth, but I had regained my own life, wrested it from the grasping hands of consumerism and manipulation, and it was a deal I would make again without a shadow of a doubt, for the price proved negligible compared to the freedom granted. My phone, lying on the table, vibrated quietly, interrupting the flow of my thoughts. The screen showed Claire's name. She was texting, asking if I wanted to come over for dinner, explaining she had made tacos and, in her usual kindness, had bought too much food. Without hesitation, I replied, yes, and getting up from the chair went into the house to change into something more comfortable for a friendly get-together. This was my real life now. Simple, sincere plans with real friends. Work I was good at, and that brought satisfaction. A house that was wholly and rightfully mine. And finally, that very freedom from people who had treated me like a personal ATM for decades, seeing no living soul behind the money. I didn't know and didn't want to know what my parents and Jennifer were doing that very evening. I didn't care how they spent their days, for they were no longer my problem, my headache, or my cross to bear. I spent 32 long years trying in vain to buy my family's love and acceptance, giving them everything they asked for and more. But that agoraphobic reserve was never enough. They wanted more money, more support, more of me, until almost nothing of myself remained. Now, giving them absolutely nothing, I unexpectedly had everything. My time, my money, my peace of mind, all of it was mine without residue, and in this fullness of possessing myself lay true luxury. I took my keys and went out, heading to Claire's house, and on the way, breathing in the warm spring air deeply, I suddenly realized with undeniable clarity that I was truly happy. Not that fake, strained semblance of happiness when you pretend with all your might that everything is fine while your own family shamelessly uses you. Not the temporary euphoria from buying them expensive gifts in the vain hope that it would earn their favor. This was real, deep, and calm happiness that comes only when you start living your life, on your own terms, finally and forever, freed from toxic people, erasing them from your heart and your space. It took me 32 years to understand a simple and bitter truth. Real love has no price and cannot be bought with money. And those people who valued me only for the numbers in a bank account weren't worth a single tear, not a single minute spent on them. I had to lose them to find myself for the first time, to find my true self, unclouded by their greed and consumerism. And having found myself, I was not going to retreat, to return to that stuffy prison from which I had escaped with such difficulty. I knocked on Claire's door, and when she opened it, a smile bloomed on my face. Not a mask of politeness, but the most genuine smile, coming from the very depths of my soul, the kind that only happens to a person who is exactly where they want to be, and with those who are truly glad to see them. "Come in," she said, opening the door welcomingly. "I, as always, made too much guacamole." I stepped over the threshold into my new, real life and mentally closed the door behind me, leaving the old one outside forever.